We're going to be talking today about how to build amazing user interfaces and apps using HTML5. And just a quick introduction, my name is Alex Fishman. I'm the Director of User Experience at OpenTV Nagra. This is Isaac Chellan, he's our UEX engineer. And we are part of the UEX studio at Nagra. Isaac and I have a kind of very specific role there where we don't deal with current products as much as kind of next gen. So it's kind of, we're pretty lucky. We get to kind of think about what's coming next and kind of future concepts and detach ourselves from the real world of kind of, internet bandwidth speeds and things like that a little bit to really try to dream a little bit more. So it's definitely a fun thing to do. So just quickly talk about what we do in the UEX team. We're definitely not just a design studio. We really consider ourselves TV experts. We definitely do visual design. It's one of our things, but we've been thinking about this stuff for a long time, and there's a lot of important things that our operators ask for that are outside of visual design itself. Things like how do we deal with advertising in an interface and make it a smooth, blended experience that isn't very obnoxious and in your way. Things like how to deal with image metadata. Recommendations is a hot topic, social, and there's a lot of people that are out there trying to tackle these, and it's definitely one of those things where we've been thinking about it for a long time. We also are really heavy on innovation. As I mentioned, Isaac and I are really kind of focused on future concepts, so we're constantly filing patents and thinking about kind of where things are going, and it's a really exciting thing. So to kind of get into what we're going to be talking about today, sometime late last year, our boss kind of called us into a room and he posed a challenge for us, and he said, basically, he wanted us to create an amazing interface for 4K. And there was a few technical requirements that he posed to us. The first one was that it had to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. No Flash, nothing, no cheating. We really had to make it it had to run in a browser and be HTML. The other thing is 4K resolution. So this was a first of its kind thing, 3840 by 2160 resolution. Getting things to move around the screen at that res is something that was really posed a challenge for us, and it was one of those things where we really had to sit down and kind of map it out and figure out how we're going to make this work without everything kind of looking very slow. And at the same time, you have this giant screen. It doesn't make sense necessarily just to take an interface and scale the whole thing up. There's really new ways that you can look at that screen real estate and figure out how to kind of put the content on the screen and create a new experience that way. And I think you're going to see that we really kind of did something unique with that. Of course, exceptional visual design, it had to look pretty, so that's kind of a given. Advanced content discovery, so I'm going to get into some of the feature set that we kind of thought through, but things like how to put recommendations front and center, social discovery, and other elements like that were one of the things that we really thought through a lot. And then also, like I mentioned, solving key operator pain points, like how do you, put advertisements front and center without being obnoxious, et cetera. So we kind of gathered around, we went into what we call our war room, and we kind of thought about TV and the evolution of it, and we said, you know what, what's different about TV nowadays, and what's going to allow us to not just upscale an existing interface, but think about new ways to explore and discover and use this screen real estate. And really what it came down to was choice. So if you think about the evolution of TV, it's really complicated nowadays. You have live TV, you have recordings, you have on-demand, there's all these apps, there's your photos, there's your music, there's so many things. I mean, and this image kind of captures it in an interesting way for me, where you can see the consumption of all these different content sources, NBC, Disney, there's things like Netflix and YouTube now as well. There's also all these devices, so it's not just choice of content, but it's choice of device for consumption as well. So we're really being inundated with choice. And we said, how can we make an interface that really kind of takes advantage of this and helps you find the things that are most important to you amongst all those millions of pieces of content and gets rid of all the noise? So we kind of thought back to the beginning of TV. So you kind of think back to like the Howdy Doody. There was one channel, there was no choice. You basically had one thing to watch, and in a way that was almost pleasant because you didn't have to think about what you were going to watch. It was like, here you go, you can watch it or not. And I'm kind of putting it in the context of this 84-inch screen just to see just how the resolution is kind of upgraded over the years. So this is kind of in context, the screen was about this size. And then as time went on, eventually we got to DVD quality video. This is sometime in the late 80s. Once again, you see just how small it is, and the choices did start to increase. You had now live TV, and you had the ability to record content. So your choice starts to slowly increase. With time, as time goes on, you get into HD. So now we have 1080p, and you can see in the context of this 84-inch screen, still only taking up 1/4 of the screen. once again, more choice comes into play. You have your live TV, you have your recordings, now you also have on-demand content, and the evolution of TV starting to get into applications and things like that. And then we come to 4K. So now we get this beautiful picture that fills up the entire screen, 3840 by 2160 resolution. And it's a great thing visually, but at the same time, we are now being inundated with so much content and so many choices that we really wanted to say, what can we do to really make this a pleasant experience without you feeling overwhelmed? So you can kind of even take it further, and you could take this one 3840 2160, you break it back into quadrants. This is actually 4 1080p videos that you can simultaneously view on this screen. You break it back one level further, you can actually view 16 DVD quality videos on the same screen. So you could see that it's really letting you watch a lot of things, but it starts to get more and more overwhelming. Let's take it back even one more step. And man, you have so much content now, but you get this feeling that's, it's pretty obvious here that you're starting to feel very kind of intimidated by this. There's not anything here necessarily that you can pull out and say, hey, I'm gonna watch this right here, right? So we said, what are we gonna do here to kind of make this not intimidating? And we thought the answer was organization. So if you take this kind of mosaic of content and you organize it, it does something like this, right? Suddenly it's starting to feel a little better. You now are taking all of your content and you're organizing it into stacks. You can pick an individual stack out, and now, for example, if this was an on-demand catalog, I just pulled out all my action movies. It starts to get a little bit easier. So we started feeling really comfortable with this concept of organization via stacks. So we said, all right, we got that covered. Now, the interface model itself, we really thought about zoomable interface. So really kind of using a camera in 3D space and putting everything in context. So you can see from full screen video, you can zoom out one level, and you can see that video in what we call a media card. You zoom out one more level, and you can see kind of all the content in a particular stack that you chose. You zoom out one more level, and you have all your stacks. So at any point in time, you can kind of come in and out to the interface, but it's always contextual, so you always kind of feel like you know where you are. After that, we said, all right, we got this kind of, we're feeling pretty good about this. We started to wireframe. So this is the point where we're getting closer to kind of approaching Isaac and saying, all right, here's what we're looking for. What can you do for us? So you can see the wireframes we start to develop. We're starting to get a kind of a natural flow that's making sense. We're kind of thinking about how much content we're going to be able to put on the screen at one time. What's the right number of items? And there's all this other stuff that's off screen, but it's still there. We started getting to more visual wireframing, so it's starting to mature a little bit and mature a little bit. And at this point, we're starting to feel pretty comfortable about our interface model. So now we kind of move to feature set. Oh, sorry, one more thing is the content formation. So these are all the different view types that we thought would make sense in this kind of camera-based, zoomable interface, stack-based. So these are all the formations that we posed to Isaac and said, what can we build here? What's realistic? And of course, not all of them made it, but most of them did. And that's a lot of credit to Isaac on that one. So then we said, all right, let's look at feature set. What is this interface going to need to kind of go through these millions of pieces of content, bring everything that you want to the forefront, and get rid of everything else? The first thing is what we call our anticipation engine. It's basically a level of intelligence that we gave to the interface. So it's learning about you over time, and it's figuring out what you like and what you don't like. It's based on time of day, based on who's watching, profiles. And over time, it's really going to start saying, there's all these things that you can watch, but we know you're not interested in that. So let's take these 3 things and put them on the screen for you. And you'll see an example of that when we show our interface. The next thing is social discovery. So we're really been thinking about social for a long time, and there's a lot of different ways that people are approaching it. The thing that we're really excited about social is the fact that people know you much better than an algorithm. Your friends really kind of, especially friends that you've had for a long time, they really know what kind of things you're into, what your hobbies are, what kind of content you like to watch. So we feel like there's no better source than one of your friends to actually point you to a piece of content. Collections is this concept where you can take any topic or keyword, anything that interests you, and turn it into a channel. So instead of going to NBC, CBS, or ABC now, I can actually create, like, I'm really into the San Francisco Giants. I can create a Giants channel. Every time there's a new game on, it's going to be added to my channel. But also, maybe there's an interview with Buster Posey on a radio show. That's going to be put on my channel. So everything related to that team is actually going to be dynamically put in real time. And then every time I go back to that channel, I'm constantly finding new things that are in that particular keyword or topic of interest. Trending analytics, what's hot? This is something that, of course, is just a really interesting gauge of user behavior. So not only globally, like let's say there's an Academy Award show or something, and you totally forgot about it, but by going to this trending kind of map, you can see that all these people are recording this event, and it's kind of a good reminder for you to basically tune to that, or maybe even set an auto record for you so that you don't miss it. Scenographic trick modes is kind of the last thing that we were thinking about. We're really kind of looking at this screen space and saying, instead of just using like a scrubbing 2x, 4x, let's go into visual thumbnails. It's a really fun way to explore content, especially not only from one content piece to the next, but inside of a movie or show by itself, all the scenes. So you're going to see an example of all these things in our interface that we show you in a few minutes, but this is kind of the bundle that we came up with in terms of the interface model and then also the feature set. And we took all this to Isaac and we said, all right, here's what we're going for. You know, how realistic is this? Are we crazy? What can we do here? And of course, with those things that we mentioned, it's got to be all HTML running. And I'll show you what kind of Isaac came up with.
Mind switching the inputs?
Sure.
No problem. So yeah, they came to me with quite a challenge. And I didn't really have a choice. I had to build it. But so I'm kind of going to talk about this from the engineer's perspective, kind of what Alex just went through before, and talk about the, so we'll start initially with the design challenges very simply. As I saw as an engineer, we have a ton of space. How do we fill it? Okay, we filled it. How do we navigate it? So we got this stuff. And to simplify what Alex went through, they came up with a system where we had a bunch of elements. The elements could be non-homogeneous. So they could be video elements. It could be a stack of video elements, but it could also be video movies, TV, YouTube, home content like photos and home movies, all mixed into a stack right there. Once you hit that stack, you come in, it comes forward in 3D space, and you have this wall of content. So when looking at this, we have presented with several challenges. Many of those challenges were one that was a 3D interface, which is more difficult to do in HTML, which is not designed for it. Two, we have a lot of content that needed to animate and animate smoothly. Again, HTML was not created for animation. I talked about the non-homogeneous content. We needed a way to dynamically update these elements on screen, and it had to be very fast. And also, we needed to take these elements that were at one point in 3D space very tiny on the screen and bring them up to full screen and have that look good. So I'll talk a little bit about our solution. The first one, sort of a metaphor. When looking at all these elements on the screen, I thought about the actors on the stage. And so when I came up with my process, I thought about, OK, if I want to create this, I'm going to take the actors. I'm going to send them the wardrobe, they're going to costume, and then they're going to go to the director and get their positions, and then they're going to take their positions on the stage. And I use this as sort of my guideline for coming up with this simple class diagram, which is a sort of an extension of MVC with some added components, added in a skinning component for the dynamic updating. And I also added in a layout element for being able to have dynamic position changing on the view. The next step was animating all this content. Looked at several different ways to animate in HTML. The first way with CSS is to actually define the transitions within the style sheet itself. That works pretty well, but it's not great when you want to animate a lot of content. So we couldn't use that. What seemed to work best was to dynamically apply CSS styles using JavaScript, and specifically to use the matrix 3D transformation property. This allowed you to define all your transformations, scale, rotate, translate in one process rather than applying them in steps. So there was efficiency there. It was OK to use translate, scale, 3D, but it added a couple more steps to the process. And the next thing that was very important is to make sure you use the request animation frame when doing your rendering. Request animation frame only calls your render callback when the browser is ready to paint. This is the older method in HTML for animation was to use a timer object, and you would set your timer to do a callback every X amount of milliseconds. The problem with that is sometimes the browser wasn't actually ready to draw the screen, and you had a wasted cycle. And lastly, I'm going to talk about how the templating structure worked for this, which was kind of different. In this, we had our view, your view object, or it could be let's say your view object was a VOD movie. When it made its call to render to the screen, it would go and call render and would call the skin manager. the view would pass a little piece of data with it. It would pass some template data for what was supposed to appear in the view, and it would pass information about its skin. It would go to the skin manager, which would then retrieve a snippet of code, a package, which is a little bit of HTML and a little bit of CSS. It would then takes this data, it takes this template data, that HTML package or skin package, and passes it to a template utility, which then binds that data to the HTML and then inserts it into the DOM. It also looks at the CSS styles, checks to see if that CSS style is already applied into the DOM. If it isn't, insert it. If not, just ignore it. And now I'll talk a little bit about when we went through the limitations of CSS that we came across. One is that for efficient animation, you're really limited to translations, rotations, scales, and opacity changes. Any of the other sort of effects that you would get with CSS that are kind of cool, like drop shadows, glow effects, any of the filter effects, really hinder animation performance and really can't be used. You can apply them after your transitions, but not during transitions. And lastly, you're also just limited to using HTML elements, which basically means everything's in a square. You're limited to image tags, div tags, video tags. And while you can do a lot, and I think for most interfaces this is actually plenty, there are things that it can't do, and it's always nice to see if you can let the designers go forward with their imagination what they can come up with. Now that I've talked a little bit about from the engineering side, I'm turning over to Alex to actually demo the UI, and then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about what we're working on now with WebGL.
Thanks, Isaac. Excuse me. All right, so this is Ultra. This is kind of the end result of everything that we kind of thought through, gave to Isaac, and here's what he was able to develop for us, and it's something that we're really proud of and excited to show it to you guys. So it's a profile-based system, so in this case I'm going to log in, and let's log in as one of the users. What happens now is I'm exploding out my content universe. So this is actually, we're really using 3D space to its fullest. You can see here that this is a completely passive viewing experience at this point where I'm actually not navigating at all. I'm kind of just sitting back on my couch and relaxing. And it's that anticipation engine that I was referring to earlier, which is actually bringing content to the forefront for me that it thinks I really want to watch at this exact moment. So it knows I was into Mad Men, but I didn't click anything, so it went away. There's this new game that just came out, but I'm not really interested in this either, so it's going to go away. Everything's kind of giving me a 5-second preview, and if I hit select at any time, I can go full screen on it. Now, one other thing that's interesting about this is that we're really utilizing 3D space where the things that are the closest to you in 3D space are the ones that it thinks are the most relevant to you. And everything that's kind of way in the back, it's still in your universe, but it doesn't feel like you want to watch it at that time, so you kind of can't even see it. It's really kind of buried back there. This is a really kind of difficult thing to navigate, so we do have a method where if you kind of hit a directional button, it kind of reorganizes into a helix formation. So this does let you kind of almost navigate in a single strip view. So I can go one at a time. I can actually skip 20 items at a time by going down a row. And it kind of lets you go through that way. But we were thinking, you know, this is very cool, and it's a nice use of 3D space, but it might not be the most efficient method of navigation. So this is where we bring in our organization layer. So I can bring up the main menu here. And it's a very simple main menu. And as soon as I go over to my first category, which is live TV, you can see that everything sweeps away and it comes back nice and organized as a stack. So this is what we call our live TV stacks. So if I go into my live TV stacks, you can see I can navigate between stacks here. This is a channel-based view. All HTML. These are actually really high-res images at this resolution. The performance is really something that we're pretty pleased with. We also have this thing we call a smart sort. So right now I'm looking at it by time, but by hitting a sort button, I can actually switch to a channel-based view. I can hit sort again, and I can sort by alphabetical. I can do it again, and this is one that we're pretty excited about. It's actually sorting by popularity. So this is that kind of what's hot concept, where it's taking all the live TV stuff and it's saying, here's your stack of top 50. You know, this is 51 to 100, 100 to 150. I'm not sure how many people are actually going to ever navigate past the first stack of what's hot, but it's really cool that you can kind of get a nice organized view of the things that are most popular right now. So then if I actually want to go into a stack, I can just simply select it, and it does a nice sweep and goes into what we call our wall view. So this is where I can kind of navigate through individual items. We have this concept of the video preview throughout, where if I don't do anything for a few seconds, it automatically starts playing a preview for me. This is actually a 1920 by 1080 preview. So this is the first thing where you're really kind of getting a really good resolution look at this screen real estate without taking up the full screen. You can kind of navigate around, go through different pieces of content. And if you find something that you want to watch, it's going to show you a preview, and all you have to do is hit select, and I can just go full screen on it. And it's that simple. So now I'm watching the Avengers. Now, if I want to find out more info about the Avengers, I can simply hit an info button, and now I can see a nice big box cover. I can actually scroll over and get a synopsis, really high-res image, really good resolution on the synopsis text, so you can still read it. Cast and crew, so if I want to see what other movies Scarlett Johansson's in, I can kind of pivot that way. And then I can go into our related content as well. So this is one of the things we're really putting front and center, is we're trying to take related content and say, here's other movies that you might want to watch based on what you're watching right now. It's using that same video preview concept, where after a few seconds, without doing anything, it goes away. I navigate over to the next one, check out Captain America, and I'm actually not that interested in watching anything else right now, so I can go ahead and exit and go back to my video. So this is a really good snapshot of kind of how we're taking individual pieces of media and showing in a stack formation all the way to a wall, all the way to a media card, and the ability to watch full screen. So we also have this kind of same concept for other types of content as well. If I go to on demand, you'll start to notice that it feels very consistent. There's not any more guessing that I have to do because I'm looking at a different type of content. It's actually very consistent. I still have stacks. I can navigate between them. One thing that's really interesting here is I'm using that same sort button, and we're calling it a smart sort, but it's going to be a different type of sort now. So I'm not looking at times anymore because I'm not in live TV. It's actually by default going by genres. And if I sort this again, I can switch to, in this case, alphabetical. And one of the ones that's really interesting to me is by release year. So I can see what the latest movies are and kind of go back in time that way. So if I go into my on-demand stack, we have, once again, a very consistent experience. Kind of navigate down, and this is a good example of one of our 4K pieces of content. It's a nature clip, so I can go into this North America clip, go full screen, and I can show you our scenographic concept that I was describing earlier. So if I hit select at any time on full screen video, it's actually going to zoom that video back, and these are DVD quality video previews of the frame that I'm in. So if I start hitting the right key, I can actually start navigating between these frames, and I'm getting a really good sense of what's going to be in there. I'm holding it down now, and then stopping, and if I hit select, then I can go full screen on that clip. And once again, like I mentioned, instead of going 2x, 4x, and just kind of seeing the video scrubbing in this weird way, it's a really cool way to kind of visually, at DVD quality, pick where you want to be in a particular movie or show. So it almost doesn't even look like it's moving here, but you can see there's like some spider webs and like some little bugs flying around here in 4K. So moving forward, we also are dealing with not just live TV and on demand, but also things like photos. Photos is one of the ones that's really interesting to me. It's very popular nowadays on your phone or tablet to consume your Instagram feed or things like that, and it's a great experience, and it's a very social experience, but the one thing that's really limiting about it to me is the screen size. It's either a 4-inch screen or maybe a 10-inch screen, but wouldn't you much rather look at your photos on a beautiful 84-inch screen in 4K? And especially with a lot of cameras, and even your phone cameras, they're actually giving you 4K resolution in the picture itself. So when you look at it on here, you're actually getting that full resolution. So if I go into a stack here, this is the kid's soccer game, I can zoom it up to full screen size, and it's like, wow, that's so much better to me than looking at it on a little screen. I'm sitting back on my couch, I have the family around, and we can get a nice picture of my kid's soccer game from that afternoon in really high res. Moving to music, same concept. We have box covers here. We have album covers here for music. I can sort by genre or switch to another method. You can go in, and one thing that's interesting about music to me is that we don't just do a visualizer here. We're actually tapping into an API to be able to pull in the music video. So if I stop on one of these videos, for example, instead of just kind of giving me the title of the song, it's actually going to play the video for me. And once again, this is a 1920 1080 video just taking up the center of my screen. So one other concept I want to just kind of show how we pulled off is the collections. So this is the thing I was referring where you turn anything into a channel. So for me, food and cooking is something I'm really into, gangster movies, baseball. So this is kind of the concept where we have a stack around baseball that I created. It's basically like taking a search term and creating a channel from it. So anytime there's new baseball related content, if I come back here in 2 days, it's going to be a different set of movies. So anything that's kind of relevant at the time, trending content, things that my friends are adding, it's all going to kind of pop into my baseball channel. So then we have our social stacks. This is something that I'm pretty excited about as well. So, the way we look at social is we don't just want to take your Facebook feed and kind of show you one post at a time on your TV or your Twitter feed. It's not necessarily the best way to kind of consume that content. It's much better on a computer. Here what we're doing is we're actually turning your friends into channels. So instead of just going to like my NBC channel, I can go to my John channel. This is one of my coworkers, and I can start getting a snapshot of the kind of content that he's into. Real Genius, 16 Candles. He's obviously into 80s comedies, and it really kind of lets me know what kind of things that he's into. And if there's a lot of movies that I'm into as well, I can actually I can add John as one of my channels, and I know that every time I come back there, I'm going to be getting content that it's really interesting to me. Here's another one of my friends, which is Elizabeth, and if I go into her stack, I can actually kind of look into the individual movies and shows that she's watching, and if I scroll to this one, I can actually see, oh, there's 2 people watching this right now. So that's pretty cool. And if I go full screen on this particular video, which is a puppy race, because there's 2 other people watching this, I'm actually going to get a notification. So if you look up in the top right corner of the screen, we're going to get a little notification here that says, hey, do you want to join Beth and Farah and watch this together? And so if I scroll over and say join, it's letting them know that I want to join them. And it looks like they've been notified. Beth is going to join me as well, and Farah is not interested, and there we go. So now Beth has joined me, and we're watching this piece of content together. So what's cool about this to me is that we have this video that's completely unobstructed. Once again, it's a 1920 1080 video, and right next to that, this to me is a really cool social experience. So we can actually talk about it over video together, and this is kind of we have a puppy example because it's one of our 4K clips that we were able to find, but excuse me. For me, like, the World Cup is coming up, and I think it would be such a cool thing to be able to see the match unobstructed, 1920 1080, right in the center of the screen, and you might be able to surround it with 5 or 6 friends, and you're all watching it together in real time, talking about it. Maybe a couple of you are rooting for the same team, and you're throwing some tomatoes at the other 3, like some virtual tomatoes, and the match is right in the center of the screen. So it's a really cool way to kind of take the screen real estate and this giant screen and just kind of have it all there without any of it overlapping or being obstructed. So this is one of the ones that we're really excited about, and I think it's a really cool kind of example of social. And the last thing I kind of want to show you guys right now is our apps. So it's one of those things where I feel like it's kind of a complicated thing that no one's really kind of nailed yet. I mean, TV apps is something that is going to be really big, and it's getting bigger. There's things like Roku that are really becoming great, and other services, but one of the things that we were looking at with apps was how do we make TV-centric apps that are really just taking full advantage of the screen real estate. So we actually developed our own app, which we call the Buzz. So if I go into this stack, you can see the first app here is the Buzz. This is an app that we developed and that we're really excited about, which shows trending content. So it's not just sorting your stacks by popularity, but we actually have this really cool view now where there's this, if it starts going here, we have this ambient motion that happens, so the content's kind of slowly moving, and we also have these kind of comment bubbles. So you can see this particular piece of content has 523, now 529 comments. It's red because there's a lot of chatter about it. This Game of Thrones show is also red because there's a lot of chatter about it. Now there's a couple of blue ones here as well. You can see those aren't being talked about as much. So we're color coding kind of the level of chatter around a piece of content. And I can actually see the individual comments as well just by selecting this piece of content. I kind of blow it out now, and I have a nice 3D view of the individual comments that are inside that bubble. So now I can see in real time as the comments come in, the ones that are closest to me, we're using 3D space again, are the most recent comments. And if I go, the ones that are kind of being pushed to the back are the earlier comments, which I don't necessarily need to see as much anymore. We have the ability to look at text comments here, as well as audio and even video comments. So once again, unobstructed video in the middle, and we have Beth here from our earlier video kind of dancing along to this song with us. So once again, one of the things that we're really excited about. And yeah, I don't know, she's a pretty good dancer, huh? Beth was pretty embarrassed to do that for us. She's actually one of our coworkers, but she was a really good sport, and it only took about eight or nine takes at her house to get her to be like, all right, you can do that dance one. Get rid of the other ones, don't put them on YouTube. So there we go. Now we're back to full screen video, and this is kind of where our ultra demo ends. So this is really the culmination of all of that thought, the interface model, the feature set, our conversations with Isaac, and this is what we're able to create as a result of that. So now that you've seen that, I'm going to pass it back to Isaac to show you, based on this, there was a lot of learnings, and one of the big things that we're actually focusing on this year is a transition from CSS to WebGL to do some additional things like lighting, morphing, and some other effects that we're really excited about for the kind of V2 of this. And so I'll pass it back over to Isaac now. Switch our input. And just to quickly let you know, Isaac is such an HTML fiend now after this project. Even these slides are in HTML. So he's like,
you're ruining my reveal in a moment. Okay. Anyway. Anyway, I also want to add that the Ultra demo that you just saw, which we're of course running on these Macintoshes right now, we're porting it right now to a set-top box. And it actually is running right now on OpenTV5. And I'm working on adding all these features that we've seen right now onto running on an actual satellite set-top box. All right, so WebGL, let's get into it. If you're not familiar, WebGL is and gives you an interface to OpenGL. It lets you do a lot of take advantage of OpenGL, and you get to paint directly to a WebGL canvas within a browser. It's kind of the first time that there was sort of a plug-in free 3D that you could do in a browser without having to use some sort of third-party plug-in. It lets you take advantage of GPU-accelerated physics and image processing, and it also lets you, in addition, write your own code and program directly to the GPU. It's called shader coding, and allows you to write your own custom effects. So you can do some pretty cool things. I'll show you an example of that shortly. The biggest problem, I think, with WebGL right now is that it's not easy to use. It's a very low-level API. It's a C-like language, and so it's not friendly to JavaScript developers at all. There's no markup language, so when you're working in this, you need to handle all of your layout. Makes things like laying out text, images, and stuff, which if you were used to developing with HTML was handled by the browser for you. You don't get that support. How do we make this easier? There are several frameworks out there right now, and more are probably coming out and becoming better at it that simplify this process. 3JS is probably one of the first. Famous has come out. They do HTML and they do WebGL, and Babylon is another one. This reduces development time dramatically. The other thing they came up with is for the layout, because through an Ultra I had a templating system using HTML, which I really liked. How could I create something like that to run in a WebGL interface? And I came up with using SVG this time, where I would bind SVG to a snippet of bind data to a snippet of SVG, and then I would take that and paint it to a 2D canvas, which would then comply to a 3D piece of 3D geometry. So I showed earlier how HTML templating works. So this is a diagram of how the SVG fits in. It's almost identical. You'll see the only difference is that the skin packages now only consist of a snippet of SVG. And the other difference is that when the template utility, instead of inserting that HTML into DOM, takes that SVG and paints it onto a 2D canvas, and then takes that image and uses it as a texture to apply to 3D geometry. Otherwise, it functions exactly the same. And this made it very easy when switching over to WebGL. I only had to change a couple classes, and I could keep the rest of my code for Ultra. I'm going to go back and come back out of here and show a couple examples. I didn't show this earlier. I kind of forgot. But this is an example of how the HTML templating works. So right here is the Ultra engine. Right now I've simplified it so I can just sort of add and paint sprites onto the screen and throw a whole bunch up onto there. I can do two things. I can add and remove sprites, and I can make them transition between two positions.
And you can see as that happens, the total sprite count as it increases, and the frames per second as that happens. You can see how it changes as it gets more complicated.
I use this for testing when we're designing UIs for different platforms. We can set it up in the platform, and I can tell Alex, okay, this is reasonably how many sprites you have to work with. So again, same engine here, but switching it now to using the SVG and that other method I described. You can see we can have almost the exact same effect. Whoops, I hit the wrong one. Do that again. Exact same effect. But right now, this is a WebGL canvas. Right now, all those things, when we do the call to render, it's now grabbing the SVG file, taking that, drawing it out on a 2D canvas, and then painting it onto the 3D geometry. And you can see that it works very well. It's not quite as fast as CSS and HTML with that process because of the added step of having to paint to that 2D texture. But it's fast enough, and generally you don't need, you don't need like 500 items to make a UI. So kind of to bring this all together, how does, like what we do, this whole slideshow is actually written in the same process. These slides are all SVG files that are being dynamically updated from a model and then rendered to the screen as I move back and forth through them. And also to prove that, I can take this and I can transform. So what I've done here is I've taken one giant sprite and I've applied two things. I've taken that sprite and I've split it up into this grid. I've also taken the textures between that one giant slide and each of these individuals one, and I applied a morphing algorithm, which I've written in shader code to make that transition. Now that we have things broken up, I can then use the same engine to move these things around in 3D space by changing the formation. I can also do that morphing transition, morph between that texture and also a video. Same thing, I'm taking the individual video textures and applying them. I can break that up again, and I can move them around in 3D space. I can make a little visualizer by animating them to the audio. I'm showing off right now. And then, of course, I can bring it back into a full screen video and bring it back into our sprites. And I can go right back into our slideshow and morph us right back. So I think this just to illustrate a lot of the power now with WebGL. This is something that wouldn't really be possible with HTML, but is something that is very possible with WebGL. And it's pretty exciting because there's far more things we can add, like particle effects. Just everything that you've kind of seen in a 3D video game is now sort of possible with WebGL. And that I'm going to conclude my side.